Hey everybody, it's Jon Croft, and this is Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft. And how is everybody doing? We have Rebecca Croft here. How you doing, Rebecca?
Hi, how are you?
Hi. Doing good. Yeah, so we're going to be talking about what kind of faith-based films we need to be making now. And yeah, so you want to ask me a question, Rebecca?
What media experiences have you been having this week, John?
Yes, I have had a few, but the one that stuck with me, and I watched a video by a guy named Ryder, the Omniscient or something like that, and like a young Christian filmmaker, and he had a really articulate video about what Christian filmmakers should be making. And so I thought I would kind of weigh in on that discussion a little bit on our podcast. And so we're talking about what kinds of faith-based films do we need now? And so it's a little bit of an exploration of genre, but also just kind of like what I want to do is inspire fellow Christian filmmakers to think outside the box of faith-based film, think outside of that genre. And so we'll play a little bit of his video. It's got some like video game animatics in it. But we'll still, um, li watch a lot of his video. But you know, the discussion of genre will have to come up, the discussion of, why Christian filmmakers make films, what the purpose making films are. And and so let me see if I can share his video. Um we will see if it works. Had a little bit of technical difficulty today. Um can you see that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. So I'm just going to play some of this. I hope you don't mind. And we will pause every now and then and discuss kind of what's being said.
Dear Christian filmmakers, stop making faith-based films. As conservative Christians, we have a reputation for movies that suck. And the reason is because Christian filmmakers and corporations have been focusing on communicating our faith, not on good storytelling. You may think that's a good thing, but in a little bit, I will tell you why it's actually the opposite. Hello, my friends. Today we're going to be talking about the Christian movie space and why I think Christian filmmakers need to stop making faith-based films. First and foremost, why do people think?
Okay, now, first out of the gate, I just think it's really good that he goes for the jugular and says, just stop making faith-based films. And a lot of Christians who aren't in filmmaking or aren't in media might misunderstand that statement and say, no, you should keep making films that talk about God. Of course, we should keep making films that talk about God. What he's saying is he's using the term faith-based film to denote a genre, a certain genre of filmmaking. And so what he's saying right out of the gate is saying we need to stop making this particular kind of film. And he's 100% correct. We need to stop making those kinds of films, but he'll talk more about this. So, as he says, first and foremost, why do people think Christian movies are bad?
Christian movies are bad, and what is defined as a faith-based film? When you say the phrase Christian movie, what's the first thing most people will think of? Probably corny, cheesy acting, and preachy scripts. These types of movies are most known as Hallmark movies that are usually targeted at the stereotypical 36-year-old soccer mom. And I can't take credit for that label because I didn't make it. God's Not Dead 1 and 2, Miracles from Heaven, and Saving Christmas are a few examples. These movies, while made with good intentions, are, for lack of a better word, uninspiring. When I say faith-based films, these are good examples of that phrase. They are what most mainstream Christian films are comprised of today, usually consisting of pointed dialogue and on-the-nose preaching and references. These movies are made with one purpose in mind, targeting a safe audience. Now, there's a better way. to tell stories, and I will get into that later. Specifically, there's a balancing act regarding character development and world building that writers have to deal with when coming up with a story. And
Okay. So he's talking about the cost benefit analysis here when you're making a film. Why are you making this film? And so that's a really good thing to delve into, because I think many who watch faith-based media, many who are Christians, and wonder what's going on in the space, why are films this way? They don't understand that the reason that they're this way is because of the market. It's not because there's Christian filmmakers that are uninspired and unartistic and unable to make quality films. Of course we can. In fact, probably the reason that we're not making them is because the market is keeping us out of the market. And so we're working in Hollywood to make good films, right? We're trying to make good films in Hollywood. We're working as crew and talented people working in Hollywood, but we're not able to make those quality films in the faith-based market. Why? He's going to tell us why. So we'll get more into this.
it's an issue that Christian movie producers are having problems with. The movies are not made to reach a broader audience and hook them in with captivating characters. They're made by executives of companies like PureFlix to target a reliable audience that thrives on movies that are safe, movies that don't deviate from a predetermined script that they all use in their movies simply to encourage cash flow. Some of the most inspiring movies and books were made because they didn't stay in the safe zone.
Now, this is a really important factor here. Markets are not about art. Markets are not about being daring and being risky. Markets are about making money. And specifically in film, because film is very risk averse. In other words, most films, it's a very risky bet and you're going to lose money. So this is why people who are in the business of making films, you get the producers and directors, right? The producers half the time, they get formulaic and they get genre specific when they make a film. Why? Because they then want to gauge the ability for the film that they're making to make money. So in the faith-based genre, the idea about making money in the faith-based genre is targeting an audience. And the audience that they target is, as he said, 36-year-old soccer moms who want safe content. They don't want daring content. They don't want weird stuff. They want a certain kind of content. That's why we're getting a certain kind of content. Okay. So this is not some weird metaphysical made up thing. This is how these marketplaces work.
But the majority of mainstream Christian movies do not go outside that box. It's daunting to deviate from an audience that regularly gives you their money, even if the stories aren't that good. Now, from a business standpoint, this is a good thing. You want reliable income. But from a biblical and kingdom-oriented perspective, if you are trying to make movies that don't reach the broader audience and inspire people with characters that you can relate with on a broader scale, nobody's going to be interested in your stories, and you're not actually doing the kingdom of God any help. The reason faith-based movies are cheesy is because they are required to be that way. It's not because of a lack of talent, but because the genre has been created to meet certain requirements to.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. You're required to be that way. All right. It's a safe audience that doesn't want to take chances. And so this is, sometimes, yes, the marketing people get involved and they mess everything up. Right. And so often what you have to do is lead with a risk. You have to do some risk taking. And so there needs to be some people who are willing to lead with those risks when you're, like beggars can't be choosers, right? When you're just hoping to make your next film and you don't actually make a lot of money, you don't feel like you can be risky, right? Well, guess what? There are people who can be risky, and many of them are first-time filmmakers who just need somebody who take a chance on their work and put it out there regardless of how it's kind of marketed or how it's, you know, or who the film is being sold to, right? It's just being made as a good film, regardless of the marketplace. And so first time filmmakers are often doing that. They're not thinking about the marketplace. They're just thinking about making a great film. And or they have this story that they're obsessed with and they want to put it out there. And so what you need though is that middleman, and all you need is like a few producers or some kind of platform. And we'll talk about Lore TV in a minute, but like because he actually mentions Lore TV. Um, but I think he knows, like I do, that Lore is one of these platforms that could be the platform for these new filmmakers to take risks. And so, because generally what you're seeing is not that. You don't have these platforms like Pureflix taking risks on filmmakers, making daring or artsy or offensive films. They're not doing that. So instead, they're pandering to the safe audiences.
Pander to a singular, safe audience that does not take chances. These movies keep being made because the producers have a monopoly on the market. So it doesn't make sense to invest in new markets. As companies like Pureflix become bigger, there is less risk for people to invest in lower budget films. And executives start to cater to major markets like Lifeway Christian bookstores and the stereotypical 35-year-old soccer mom. That's where you get modern Christian films where they're all feminized. So the propaganda in mainstream Christian movies is over-spiritualized and demasculinized. You'll have a hard time finding the everyday working man watching Hallmark Christian movies. And the whole topic of demasculinization in movies is a very broad topic. So if you'd like me to discuss that, make sure you comment below. Filmmakers who are in unions or have to report to a larger corporation have to meet certain requirements in their films, like having to feature some sort of creature or character format. Along these same lines, Hollywood's latest requirement for their films has been to have a diverse character or a diverse cast, even if there is no relation to the story whatsoever. Christian movies, unfortunately, do something similar. There has to be either a dog, a horse, a little girl, or a serious traumatic emotional event like cancer or breaking up with a romantic partner for it to be part of a good quote-unquote movie. The danger in these sorts of movies is a relationship that goes bad. Compare these stakes with those commonly found in sci-fi, namely death, the destruction of the world, and the possibility of your family and children dying. Safe to say, the stakes are way higher and much more interesting. That doesn't mean emotions can't be a big part of movies. But the issue is when emotions or spirituality is elevated above all the storytelling elements, it becomes unbalanced. And as I will soon get into, Jesus actually used all of the elements of storytelling to convey a bigger picture. Now, when filmmakers start out, it's natural that they would suck. Myself as an example. I'm an amateur filmmaker, and when I first started, I didn't know the difference between good video editing and bad editing. But after years of practice, I know proper pacing and when to make the right cuts. It's okay to suck, but the important thing is that you learn to get better, because movies shouldn't suck on purpose. This doesn't mean there isn't any talent and effort put in, although that is certainly the case for some films. It simply means that when you elevate the message above the story, the movie becomes lopsided. And if you prioritize the story first, the message would be conveyed naturally anyway. We as Christians need to be the ones pushing the envelope when it comes to cultural trends. And we need to be doing it in a way that brings glory to God, not encourage mockery and shame. We are made fun of because predominantly we haven't made anything else other than faith-based movies. We need to change that. Yes, part of us being Christians is that we will be mocked because we serve the Creator, not man. But that doesn't mean we need to make fools of ourselves. We need to change the way we've been thinking as Christian creators and as an audience. We serve the master storyteller, and we're not doing a good job of honoring him by creating movies that inadvertently make us a laughingstock. The problem.
Amen. Amen.
Yeah.
Yes. 100% agree with that. Were you going to say something, Rebecca?
I was just like, yeah, amen. Yeah.
I'm
Not the
glad
master
he said it.
storyteller.
I feel like a lot of Christians don't go there and bring it to that level. Of course, you know this show. That's what we do here.
Yeah.
We say it doesn't honor Christ, and that's the truth. But I think that some people they're afraid of going there. They think it'll offend hurt someone's feelings. Exactly. These people need to have their feelings hurt so that they will rethink what they're doing. They're really making a fool of themselves, and they really need to understand the stakes of this game. This is not just a preference. This is not a subjective preference. People love to say that about art. Art is actually not subjective. Okay, there's good art, there's bad art, there's good films and bad films, and good music and bad music. And people just they don't like that because it offends them. Because it might mean that there's a better artist than some other artist. And then, boo-hoo, it's true. I'm not saying I'm the best artist. I'm nowhere near any, like, the point is to get better and better. And so if there isn't a better, then what are you even doing? So he's absolutely right. It's sad. I want him to continue on. Did you want to say something before I keep playing?
Nope.
Okay.
Problem is that we've been focusing on and overemphasizing the spiritual aspects of life and disregarding the physical, mental, and emotional aspects of the character journey. When these four areas, which are pivotal to any story, just like in real life, are left out or neglected, the story becomes lopsided and the character in a story arc either becomes fluffy or underperforms. Now, when a writer sits down at his computer or notepad to draft an idea, his intention will change the end result. Seems like a no-brainer, but stay with me here. If you intend to first communicate a message or idea, your film will first and foremost be a movie about a message, not a story. Case in point, Disney, Amazon, and Hulu, and many other programs have been narrowing their focus on showing movies that prioritize diversity and the LGBTQ narrative, and showering shame on those who disagree.
Right.
Instead of
The message is what has to win out. I like how he's calling it over spiritualized. That's a really good way to put it. I think of it more in sense of because I think being spiritual is a good thing. But what he's saying is over spiritualized, and how I would describe that is it's Gnosticism. Or you could look at it as it's Christianity without action. So Christianity without action, what is faith without works? Dead. So when we are a false church, we're going to be doing a lot of talking, a lot of thinking and over intellectualizing, a lot of like nice talks over cups of coffee, but nobody's going to be helping poor people out on the street, right? So, but when you live out your faith, you do it with your body. You do things, right? And so that's, I think, a different way to put it, but I think it's the same problem. He was saying you want a character to go through all of these difficulties, right? Instead of it just being an over spiritualization. Really, if you're spiritual, you will live out your spirituality. You'll go through an adventure. You'll suffer for your faith, right? So, yeah, I think the problem is the church is cold. Half the church is cold and dead, has lost its saltiness, and is not willing to go out and live and do works for the gospel and works for Christ. So, what do you end up with? A bunch of rom-com movies where it's about like your immediate gratification. It's not about doing hard things like in an adventure movie, you're doing something really hard and difficult. It's inspiring. It inspires you to go do things with your life, right? And instead, you get a bunch of people living in small towns and oh my goodness, someone made a mistake. Like it's like he says, it's an over feminized kind of story. It's not something guys are interested in, but frankly, they've actually done research on this and people will say over feminized as though like girls only like rom-coms. I actually think that's not true. I think that um and you can correct me if you think I'm wrong here, or agree or whatever, but I actually think that women like the movies that are for men too. But men don't always like the movies that are made for women, right? And I think that it's kind of like um women, I think, like to root for their men. You go, yeah. Or they are inspired by a guy who saves the lady, right? And they want to be saved. And so that's actually something fun to watch. They want to see if the lady's going to be saved. They want to see if the guy's worth his salt. They want to see like what's going to happen. But a lot of the movies that are made for women, just guys just aren't, we're just not that interested. It's not motivating for us to do things, you know? And so I actually think a lot of movies that are made for men actually work for men and women. And a lot of movies that are made for women just kind of don't please anybody, really. Um, so, some people are pleased with it, but I think for the most part, and please like weigh in on what, do you agree with that?
I am not really a huge fan of rom-coms unless there's like really good writing. It's just not a genre that I'm usually interested in uh at all, really.
But do you think my theory holds any weight? You know?
Well, yeah, I mean I definitely prefer the action adventure sci-fi genre. Um, and I like when there's a lone wolf character that saves the day.
Hmm.
It's
You don't
definitely,
mind if that's a guy.
can it please be a guy? Like I don't I it's kind of a drag to see that with that same genre with a female action hero. It's just I don't know, it's okay.
Hmm.
It's just not as fun or exciting um
Like it
to
could it could work, but if it's not very believable, it's kind of like the stakes are removed because you realize this is just not a real scenario. And so there's no danger because it's not real, right?
yeah.
So you get to suspend your disbelief if it's a scenario that really could happen, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that too. And yeah, I mean I think there's something in our culture. There's a kind of Christ consciousness where we want to see a a masculine figure
Hmm.
saving, you know, thousands of people and we want to root for him.
Right.
Um, so I mean that's our figure of Jesus. And so um that's definitely the kind of movie I prefer. I don't really watch Hallmark movies and I
Yeah.
don't really like rom-coms. There were some good ones. You've Got Mail was a good one.
That's back in the day. Remember that one? Was it 500 Days of Summer or something like that?
Oh yeah.
That was a charming one. That was,
That was okay.
yeah.
I think it was more like um indie
Yes, had an
hipster.
indie vibe to it. Yeah.
Um
But it
so
was
that
relatable, like
yeah. But yeah, I liked
they
what
do
he was saying.
exist, they do exist.
They do exist. It's not that they're all bad, but when you're just churning them out,
Right.
just cranking them out over and over, it becomes so predictable, it becomes so um mundane. But I
Yeah.
liked what he was saying about or maybe you were saying this about character development and about characters going through struggles And I gotta be honest with you, it made me think of a verse in Song of Solomon. And this is the Passion Translation. It's um it's the Shulamite talking, it's the bride talking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And she says, I've made up my mind until the darkness disappears and the dawn has fully come. In spite of shadows and fears, I will go to the mountain top with you, the mountain of suffering love, and the hill of burning incense.
Wow.
Yes, I will be your bride. Can we see that movie?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's in the Bible.
That's
Can
great.
we see like that's exciting and that's
Hmm.
suffering and that's the journey and that's the adventure and that's challenge,
And that's the
character
pop of the
development.
moment question, like in a rom-com, except even more exciting.
Yeah, I mean there's nothing like rom-coms have nothing on that.
Yeah.
That's, you know, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like, I don't know, The Sword and the Stone, Romancing the Stone,
Right.
or just like movies that we saw from the 80s, from the 90s,
Yeah.
action adventure movies. Um,
There's a few. But yeah, you're right. It's kind of disappointing now because these films weren't even in that incredible. They were just fun. It's something you could watch and enjoy.
yeah,
And now it's like we don't even have that, you
yeah.
know?
Well, a verse like this honestly makes me think of The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
It's the journey, it's
The
the
journey, right?
the characters that are going through struggle and hardship and what do they do? How do they make it through?
Yeah.
Um,
It also makes me think of World War II in real life, right? Like these men and women who often were getting married right before going off to war or coming back home for a break to get married and go back off to war or
mm,
getting married right after coming back from the war. It's like
yeah,
it's all filled with adventure and you might not survive. They might never see this person ever again,
yeah,
and it's just like there's a hope, there's this distant hope that your life can be normal. And so, like, every chance you get to try to make it normal, you're like taking that chance, but you still have to go on this journey of suffering
yeah,
regardless. So, today we rarely talk about our duties to society. But when we think about romantic moments like that, that is half of what that is all about. You're doing your duties to society. Um, and in the midst of that, there's love and hope,
yeah.
and so what kind of romance movies do we have like that today? I mean, barely nothing,
Mm-hmm.
you know? There's barely nobody doing their duty. Like the most romantic stories in the Bible, it's almost always those two things intersecting. Like, was it Ruth as well? Where there's a lot of duty involved.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, Ruth and Boaz.
yeah,
Yeah, there was like some cultural understandings there that he was the kinsman redeemer
right.
for
Yes.
her family. Yeah, there was,
She had to do her duty in order
yeah,
to be redeemed,
yeah,
you know? And so that's sort of like, you know, like these ironies here, like between love and duty. Um, and these things kind of make both worth it,
yeah,
you know? Um, those are romantic things. But like,
yeah,
we'll talk more about my list of films that I think Christians need to make. I thought we would maybe try to finish up some of his
yeah,
video. Um, I I know he's got these animatics where I'm just kind of like, I don't watching his video, but because it has nothing to do with Christian film, but it's like he's just putting something there, like as a place card or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd rather see his face though
Mm.
doing this instead of these animatics. But okay, I'll play more.
Okay.
Telling compelling stories that move us. For example, Mulan, The Incredibles, or Lord of the Rings all have compelling stories that drive us to know and understand the characters and follow them on their adventure as they discover truths and change into someone better or worse than they were at the beginning. Streaming platforms have been pandering to outraged audiences and executives to check a political box and gain cash instead of creating characters and stories that are rich and full, which by extension would generate more money because it is rich and full. The ironic thing is that companies like Disney have been losing money for being greedy. That's a whole separate topic. So, what's the relation to Christian movies, and why does this matter? I believe the co-founder and CEO of the streaming platform Lore said it best. In some ways, Christian movies are like bad horror films. There's enough of a market to make them profitable. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is the refusal to reinvest the profits in making something better and expanding the market. Most filmmakers start by making cheap horror films to build a name for themselves, but they don't stay there. They move on. The reason we think of Christian movies as bad is because they are made that way on purpose. There's a
Yep.
sizable market of Christians who readily consume said content, and executives and writers of these films don't take the risk to make something that may be outside the norm and even a little bit contrary to their audience and our culture, specifically for one reason: money.
Yep. So I'm going to end it there. I think that's a good way to end it. Ironically, the faith-based film genre kind of comes off like they're trying to do something good by making the kinds of films they're doing. But ironically, as he points out, and it's Marcus Pittman from Lore, who we had on our show like a month ago, as we have indicated, it's actually because they're trying to make money that they're doing this. And they're afraid of taking risks on top of that, which is not that great of a combination. You want to make money, but you don't want to take risks. This is not great. So in reality, the arts and culture and technology are all intertwined, and all of those things do well, not by following the pack, but by leading the pack with innovation and risk taking. So he was kind of touching on this. Ryder was kind of touching on this kind of seeming paradox momentarily there, but there is a seeming paradox that actually by digging into story more, you're actually going to end up making more money. But investors who are not like actually very artistic and creative, what they want to do is follow the market conventions. They don't want to take risks because they actually are not artists. They're following the conventions of the marketplace, which is what somebody else did. And then they will follow the same formulaic filmmaking in order to make even just a portion of the profits that the other film made, that they're following in the footsteps of. So they'll let other people lead and make a great film, and then they will make something reiterative of that film. And that's how a whole genre gets created and a whole genre formula gets created. It gets created by a few risk-taking uh, vanguard operators on the front of the line who do great work, and they're great artists, and they get supported by risk-taking producers and risk-taking platforms who support them. And then they have a success, something like Sound of Freedom, right, with Angel Studios. They have a success. And then what there needs to be is a bunch of people following that. That tends to be what happens. Is a bunch of people in the genre who want to follow that new formula. Like there's a new change to the formula. Let's follow that. And maybe we'll get a portion of that. So my belief is that faith-based film is worked out It's all run through. It's all just old. And even though, if you look at the collision, here, I'll close this out. Even though if you look at the collision on YouTube, they say they recently did a video. Let's see if I can remember. They recently did this video on faith-based film, and they said like, well, like The Forge, they're still profitable. A lot of these faith-based genre convention films are profitable, and the Kendricks brothers are like the godfather of faith-based film. The Forge is their latest film. They made about 20 million, 20, 30 million, something like that. And it's not doing as well as they were doing. They were making like 70 million, 50 million, 38 million, stuff like this before. Now they're down in like the 20s to 25 millions with the Forge. It's still a strong number, right? It's not a complete disaster. They haven't lost money, but it's a downward trend, right? People aren't as interested in this old brand of faith-based film anymore. This kind of formulaic invention, that in many ways the Kendricks came up with. Um, so now we need new change, new blood. And what do you have? To me, Angel Studios put out Sound of Freedom. And that signals to me, just like how Jim Caviezel was Christ in the Passion of the Christ and started this whole thing with faith-based film. Um, Now we've got Jim Caviezel again coming in, shaking things up with Sound of Freedom. A Sound of Freedom is one of these kinds of films that I want to share here because I've kind of have a half-written article, but let me see if I can share it. It's here it is. Uh, oh, no, it's not doing that. Doing something weird. Oh, there it is. Okay. So, my article here, 9 kinds of stories the faith-based film industry needs right now. And this is kind of a genre study, and it's not completed yet. Um, but I'll just go into it. What kinds of film stories do we really need these days? Another soccer mom film? No. Um, so here we go. I say traditionally there are 8 major genres of film, along with some at times popular variations such as westerns or musicals. The 8 are action, adventure, comedy, drama, thriller, horror, rom-com, and documentary. The faith-based genre can double as either a drama, comedy, or rom-com, and sometimes a biopic, docudrama, or a mild thriller, but it ought to be able to double as any genre. The reason I say that is because if you notice, faith-based is not in that top 8 genres of films. But what tends to happen is that faith-based as a genre will kind of like be like a faith-based drama or like be a faith-based biopic. So it's like a subgenre, right? In mixture with another genre. So, you get these formulas kind of mixing up, and within each of those subgenres you have, conventions, storytelling conventions, and quality requirements within each one. Um, so you don't tend to see, like, for example, a faith-based horror film, right? You don't tend to see that. You don't tend to see like a faith-based action film because they're expensive to make. You don't tend to see a faith-based sci-fi. Again, very expensive to make. Um, so the faith-based genre is a small market. There's not a lot of money in it. There's not a lot of investors in it. There's not a lot of dynamism happening in that marketplace. But what you do see is like the $5 million rom-com that makes like $5 million, like, or makes 10 million if you're lucky. or you'll have like the Kendricks or the Irwin Brothers from Kingdom Story Company. And now you'll have like Angel Studios and people like this, and they'll come in and they'll maybe make 20 million instead of the 5 million that they were making. And so, and now you have Sound of Freedom, as I mentioned, and they made like 170 million, something like that. So we're talking like they made enough money of like from like 3 years of faith-based films put
Wow.
together. So what does that kind of success say to a marketplace that's making like $5 or $10 million per film? It says, holy moly, why aren't we making more Sound of Freedoms? That's what you're
Mhm.
supposed to be saying. And if you're not saying that, that's because there's some alternate reason that you're not saying that. So generally, if you're if you're in this business, you want to make money, or you're an artist and you want to make great work, like you want to make good storytelling and stuff like this. So those two motivations, they're fine. It's understandable, right? You have the producer, you have the director. Producers are generally the money men. They think about the investment. What are we going to get out of this? You know, this film's got to get made. And so this is what we're shooting for. We're shooting for this demographic of audience, you know. And so we can safely assume we're going to make so much money, right? If this happens, if that happens, if we get our distribution right, we should be doing well. The director is saying, okay, I understand the demographic thing. Fine. I want to make a great story. So I'm not going to compromise on that. I'm going to make sure it's a great story. Producer's like, yes, I'm on board with this, right? Well, compromise can happen, and it often does. And compromise in the right direction where you're working together to up your quality is, you know, a good thing. But when you're compromising in the wrong direction and you're betraying your demographic, or you're betraying the direction you could be going in to make a quality story, to make, you know, these are not good things. So what I want to put forward, and I haven't finished the story, I haven't finished this article, but like what I want to put forward is that we need to make more of not just Sound of Freedom style films, but more of lots of different kinds of films. So, so here's what I say. A faith-based genre can double as either a drama, comedy, rom-com, sometimes a biopic, docudrama, or mild thriller, but it ought to be able to double as any genre. As Paul says, we become all things to all men so that we may win some, right? We want to win people to the gospel. Some people they're not going to be communicated to through a rom-com. They're not going to be communicated to through a documentary, right? Too straightforward. They want something risky. They want an action movie. They want something that feels real. They want something that feels like there's stakes, right? So what I do is I go through all the 8 major genres of film and I say, what kind of film within each genre do we need to be making? And I actually have 9 categories here because I add one. Here are my categories, I say, of the 9 types of faith-based films we need now. 1, tense thrillers with purpose. 2, grounded civilization building adventure. 3, violent action films that deal out justice, sometimes harshly. 4, so you can see that that's not a feminized film. No feminized film there. Justice and all that stuff is important. So I'm just I'm just getting rid of these genres here because they're not needed in the actual story. Um, one second. Okay. So violent action films that deal out justice, sometimes harshly. And I've talked about Micah 6:8. Look it up. That's doing justice, walking humbly with God. So Cautionary tales is number 4. Cautionary tales that tackle the strange and macabre nature of evil. 5. Satirical roasting of timely social issues. 6. Meaningful tone poems that depict losing and longing for authentic relationship. 7. Revealing God's scientific and natural truths. 8. Relational dramas that respect every side of a social issue, revealing truth. And 9. Fairy tales and otherworldly journeys that reveal deep inner truths of God. So, as you may have noticed, many of these have the word truth in them, right? Truth, 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 authentic stuff, right? This is the kind of stuff Christians should be making. How can we call ourselves a Christian and then tell a story that has lies in it and falsity in it? Like, how can you even do that? So, as a Christian, you just can't do it. So if you want stories that have authenticity, if you want art that has authenticity, if you go to a Christian artist, you know you're going to be getting that, right? Now, then why is it that so many faith-based films just feel inauthentic? So come up with your own answer there. But an authentic, actual Christian artist is not going to do that. So yes, you can come to the conclusion that these are not authentic Christians. And I would do the same thing. So yes, I added a 9th genre, which the Inklings, C.S. Lewis, and J.R.R. Tolkien called Mythopoeia. And that's the one here. I say fairy tales and otherworldly journeys that reveal deep inner truths of God. So that, for example, would be someone like George MacDonald's stories. That would be C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien stories. That would be science fiction and fantasy. I talk about Mythopoeia here a little bit. That is Mythopoeia, often takes the shape of a fantasy or sci-fi or fairy tale that brings you into another world, which has our own values reflected and communicated in it, often more astutely than it could be without that world. So, in other words, bringing you into this other world and doing world building in the storytelling is essential to Mythopoeia, right? Fairy tale is often about this, but this world building is very important because what the point of the world building is to point out these values even more acutely within that world. So, like for example, the story of Paralandra, they're jumping from moving island to moving island, and the islands are moving. There's always this movement happening on Paralandra. There's a point to that. There's a reason in the story why those islands are moving. Suffice to say, it adds beauty to that world. It adds meaning to what God is trying to tell the reader through C.S. Lewis in that story, Paralandra. It's quite beautiful. I don't want to reveal it all to you, but Paralandra is a great example of that.
Yeah, it is.
It's pretty cool. You could call it, I'm talking about Mythopoeia here still. You could call it Mythopoeia, a sci-fi fantasy or adventure that has that very particular and very complete world building quality to it. Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia, as well as films like Star Wars, have reflected this genre very well. What I'm saying is, we've already been making Mythopoeia. Like, Mythopoeia is a genre that the Inklings called it Mythopoeia. It was a literary genre, and it just so happens as we've got films that actually follow that formula. They just don't call it what it should be called, which is Mythopoeia, which is intentionally created myth for the modern audience. That's essentially what that is. And myth, of course, has your culture's values embedded in it very astutely. So myth is not false at all. And the Bible is a myth. It's the true myth. It's the one true myth, as C.S. Lewis and Tolkien called it. Um, so film history's biggest franchises have tended to be of the mythopoeic variety. So this is why I include Mythopoeia in the 9 genres. And it's a very important reason because, like I say here, the biggest franchises have been mythopoeic. Why is that? Because so much can be spun off from them due to such effective world building. And yet, what Mythopoeia offers is a strong foundation of value building undergirding that world. This is the mythological mezzanine that the most long lasting stories are constructed upon. So there's a strong foundation of values, right? Like when Christ says, build your house on the rock and nothing will knock it over, essentially, in that parable. And so the rock he's referring to is Christ, and all the values and the meaning imbued in that relationship you have with Christ, you know, um, give you a rock for the foundation of your house. And if that's true, if you truly are on that rock, then no kind of storm is going to knock that house down. So they used to like drill into the rock, this is a real thing. It's not just make believe. Um, it was true in history as well. Um, so Mythopoeia offers this strong foundation, value building, undergirding it. So I'll read on here. So if we already make these kinds of stories, why would they be like an adventure? Why not? Why not? Why lay out a whole new category to focus on? And that's the rub, isn't it? What do we focus on and why? So, considering that faith-based film has been the most inflexible, uncreative film genre, and it has failed to even place in the top 10 of popular genres of film, we must understand why this is. Faith-based film, as a 2 decades old trend, is a fairly unimpressive genre. And many have stated this in the past, but I think it bears repeating that the genre should be retired for the simple reason that it is too restrictive to Christian artists. It's very formulaic. So, what we see now in the genre should simply be renamed a Christian drama or a rom-com or a comedy or a biopic. You can call something a Christian biopic. There's nothing wrong with that. In the future, then, there should be nothing wrong with calling a film Christian per se. But in addition to this, Christian filmmakers should work to compete in the regular market of films as well. So this means that Christians who choose not to identify their film as a Christian film should not find themselves subject to criticism by fellow Christians for doing this, because a fair understanding of why that filmmaker is not attaching the label to the film's marketing should be extended. So we can extend some understanding to some Christians. It's not saying you're not a Christian to not identify your film as a Christian film. That's not what that is. So that's what I'm trying to explain here. This ought to be a simple matter, I say. The fact is, there's nothing wrong with identifying or marketing your film in either way, either overtly or not overtly, as a Christian film, since the marketing for your film is for finding your intended audience, not just for making money or for virtue signaling to your own tribe. And that simple fact ought to be more clearly known by the public. All benefit of doubt applied as necessary. So back to the focus of film genres, you know, so I talk a little bit more about this, but um, I think like for example, I give a little example here also. Focusing more on male-driven content, action, adventure, sci-fi, westerns, fantasy, hard-boiled crime thrillers. These ought not simply be for the aesthetic beauty of the story, but for the practical understanding of some social issue that has been neglected or misunderstood in society. Many of these issues, such as the one tackled by Sound of Freedom, are the ones that men can chew on. We love to solve problems. Films like Dirty Harry did that for us in the 70s and 80s. The crime surge in the late 70s was tackled by this expression of culture. Muscle-bound justice lovers like Stallone, Schwarzenegger, and Van Damme came in eventually, but before that, the violent vigilantes like Clint Eastwood and Charles Bronson scream with blood. And people like Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York, turned that city around. So you don't shrink from challenges, you rise to meet them with culture, and then policy follows that astute cultural expression. So the idea here is that a film like Dirty Harry or Death Wish or a film like this, when there was a crime wave in the 70s and 80s, well, what do you think turned that crime wave around? I'm not trying to say that there's clear research that shows that because there was vigilante films, crime went down. That's silly. But to say that there was no impact on society is also likewise silly. So, I do draw a connection between, the mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani, who actually was hard on crime in the 80s, right? After there was a terrible crime in the 70s in that city and in many other metropolitan areas around the country. And it did turn around after that. And so there's a cultural direction we're headed, and then there's a backlash. And this doesn't just take the form of new laws or new government or things like this. It takes the form of cultural expression as well. So, in fact, my belief is that the culture leads these things. It doesn't go behind. And what leads the culture is your religious beliefs and your values. Those are placed into the culture by people like me, by people like other Christian artists, by people like Ryder, by other people in the media space who are trying to make a difference in the culture. And so when their values, when they're truth seeking, when they're mythopoeia, when they're daring films, right, enter the public zeitgeist and people talk about them, that's when culture gets created. And then that culture goes down, trickles down into government, into policy, into all these things. And so it's convincing to us that we would rather not have this crime and therefore we need to do justice. Micah 6:8. So my belief is that while yes, I'm not saying vigilantism is good. I'm not saying that their brand of justice that in these films was the correct way to do justice. That's not true. But when you have a government, and this is often the subject of these movies, is that they believed that the government was often corrupt and things like this. So it's like enter the time of the judges in the Bible, right? Now you got the judges and people going, feel lucky punk, and they take out people, right? Because how is justice going to prevail if the government itself is unjust? That's just a theoretical situation you got. But let's just say we could have an impact on the culture by making films that do talk about doing justice, right? And what does good justice look like? So you have to talk about these things. You have to present these scenarios to convince people that justice is actually not a bad thing. So, that is my number 3, violent action films that deal out justice, sometimes harshly. Sometimes it does have to be harsh, right? It doesn't always have to be harsh. But, that's storytelling, right? Tense thrillers with purpose. Now, why did I put that as number 1? That is The Sound of Freedom, right? That's the film I was talking about. This kind of film made like 175 million or something like that. I mean, an enormous amount of money. And why did it make all that money? right? It's not because Angel put it out. Like they certainly didn't hurt it, right? Because Angel's fairly good at marketing. Um, and they were willing to do it. So, a lot of people just aren't willing. I can't imagine a studio in Hollywood that would market that film as hard as Angel marketed it. So when you really think about it, it probably is a lot of it because of Angel with that film. But it was made in Hollywood. Jim Caviezel, um, Vestagi, I don't remember his name, the producer. Obviously, Monteverde directed it. He's a very visual director, so he's already rare as it comes to faith-based filmmaking. Most faith-based filmmakers are not visually oriented, so which is kind of weird, as what you'd think. They're making a film, which is a visual medium. So Monteverde is authentically good filmmaker, um, and he does care about the visuals. It does get marketed like almost like it's an action movie, which I think d- did really good favor to the film. Even though it's not much of an action movie, there's maybe one action scene in it, and it's very short. It's more of a thriller. So, but even a thriller is so much more thrilling than the typical faith-based film. So I think that a lot of that is why this film did so well. So the marketing, the genre, the genre is part of the marketing, right? But it is a significant part of the film. And it's going to get people to coming out to the film that otherwise would not come to this film. But the biggest thing is the third thing, social issues. This is a tense thriller with purpose. And the purpose is to expose human trafficking. So those three things really set this film above the typical faith-based film. It's set above at this point that you can see the typical angel film as well. And they haven't been able to match that success since then, but it's only been about a year. Generally, these kinds of things take a while to gestate. And my hope is that many other faith-based producers and studios are going to be chewing on this opportunity with Sound of Freedom and hopefully coming up with some more Christian thrillers with purpose, right? So that's my number one. Number two, grounded civilization building adventure. So what is that? That is an adventure movie, yes, but it's grounded civilization building. What does that mean? Civilization building is something that's dealing with why a society is a good society, what makes it work. And so it could be like, let's say, about the Greeks and the hoplites. I'm going to try to say it like a Greek. I can't. The hoplites, right? Um, why is the hoplite so important? Well, it's about being being from the free states of Greece, the city states, and those freedmen were the hoplites in the phalanx, and so them fighting for their freedom was why their city state prospered and survived, and they kept their freedom. So that by being willing to sacrifice in war, they kept their freedom. So this is high stakes. I mean, this is like, and the way the phalanx is set up, you're defending your neighbor. So it's like a love for neighbor. You're loving your own freedom and you're loving your neighbor. This is civilization building concepts, right? And so this very simple idea of a grounded story like Gladiator. That's Rome, but like Gladiator, yes, it's like a revenge tale. But it's also about the glory of Rome. In the beginning, as it's presented with to Maximus, he's supposed to return Rome to its roots, which is really more of a freedom-loving institution right? There's this glory to Rome, yes, in battle, but just like the hoplites, right? It's it's going to battle when in the order and the operations and the way Rome goes to battle in order to preserve freedom. And so these concepts haven't really changed that much. Like in America, you send men off to war to what? To preserve American freedoms. So this is like not that foreign of a concept, and yet it's been around for over 2,000 years, and it's essential part of Western civilization. So these grounded civilization building adventures are great because in adventures, when you go off and you do something interesting, like Homer's Odyssey, right? But then you also, like the Iliad and like with Troy and stuff like this, you're also fighting for your duty, for the duty of your city state or the duty of your people, or for your family. And so these are all themes that really resonate with foundational concepts of Western civilization. And so, like movies like Troy and these other kinds of movies, and as you know, I'm working on one called The Hoplite. These to me are the kinds of stories that remind us why our civilization is great and discusses these concepts, right? Because many people don't even know or care about them, and they really shouldn't care less about these subjects. They really should preserve and protect their culture because their culture is actually a good thing. It's keeping them alive, right? So I think that's pretty important. Number three was the violent action film, which deals out justice. And again, that's important because there are many today who do not regard justice. And with all the rioting that happened a few years ago, and where nobody cared, like of course people cared, but the people in government didn't seem. I don't want to get too much into it, but it's just like people do need to be reminded sometimes that justice does exist and justice does matter. So, okay, next, number four is cautionary tales that tackle the strange, macabre nature of evil. That is often obviously a horror film, right? So these are the way Christians can relate to horror film is to deal with the problem of evil, right? So it's not like Christians can't deal with the problem of evil. You know, many Christians are scared of doing that, but you just read the Bible. The Bible does not shirk away from this concept. Um, and but the reason I start number four with cautionary tale is it's reminding the viewer that everybody has a choice. And the cautionary tale is a way of saying if you make the wrong choice, bad things can happen to you. So it's a way of reminding you to stay on the straight and narrow, do the right thing. Um, but like there might appear to be a weakness in what I just said, which is that some people who stand the straight and narrow, bad things still happen to them, right? Like the story of Job. So it's not like the Bible doesn't deal with these concepts, it does. So, and that's what you see in many horror films, right? You have the victims of this killer or something. But then what? You have the last person who survives. And why does that person survive and defeat the villain? Because they are like Job. They stay true to their principles. They have this they have a higher sense of duty. They have a higher sense of love and of self-sacrifice. And ironically or paradoxically, often the ones who survive horror films are the ones who give unselfishly of themselves. And therefore, you'd think that they would be the first to die. But paradoxically, it's those who tend to survive. And so this is a lesson, right? There's so many great lessons in horror, actually. This is a lesson to the Christian audiences out there that, like Christ, right, who descended into hell for us, after dying on the cross for us, defeated evil. And so, that's like a horror film. I think there's so many things like this in the Bible that are just awesome. The army of skeletons, and they're just like so much cool visual imagery in the Bible that's macabre and strange. But there's plenty to mine there. I think if you just don't lose your Christian themes, and you don't have to get so visually grotesque as some horror films do. It's more of like the idea of horror that is so much more effective anyway than something like gore. Gore is actually not as effective in horror films as the idea of horror. And so Christians need to remind themselves of this. You know, just attaching the word horror to a film does not make it evil and bad. You have to stay true and drill into your themes. And if you can do this, then you've got something that's really effective as a film, and it really can tell truths about the world and plenty of biblical value to it. So that was my number 4. Satirical roasting of timely social issues. Often, obviously I'm talking about a comedy here, you know, but there's a lot of stuff to make fun of in our society right now because there's just so many absurdities that you see in our society, from the internet to cancellation to about laws and how government behaves to like just politics can be hilarious today and silly. Just so society in general, like our education system and our churches, and there's just so many things to laugh at right now that are absurd, ridiculous. And so I don't think we should be afraid of people getting offended. There, that's why comedy is great because people get offended. Have we forgotten this? Like this is actually laughter is you holding your offense to the point at which it makes you break. And you're just like, I can't handle it anymore. This is crazy. So like your body breaks down and you start laughing. It's almost like involuntary because why? Because there's part of you that's actually offended, right? And so like often the most gross out or offensive comedians are the ones I laugh at the most because I'm like, this is so like it's like almost terrible that I'm even listening to this. But it's like, it's one of those things that you don't necessarily are gonna say or think, but like somebody in the world thought of this, and I just never would have thought of that. But it's you just can't help but break down and laugh. So these are good moments where you get to kind of like, it's kind of like enjoying something beautiful in life. It's like just a simple, beautiful thing. You get to take a breath, a breather from all the hits you get, when you go out to the office or you living your normal life. Then you go have a comedy and have a laugh, and you feel better, you know? So why can't Christians provide this? Of course we can do that. It's just, the idea that Christians aren't talented or don't have the insight or all this stuff, it's so absurd. Just the thought of it. I bet you, like half the people out there that are making good things are actually Christians already. They're just not talking about it so openly. They're just like, this is my life. I'm a Christian. I believe in God, but I'm not gonna like make a faith-based film. I'm gonna make this other thing, and I'm not gonna make it a big deal. I'm just gonna be part of making good stuff. And I think that's also a great calling. There's nothing wrong with that. So, what do you think of my list so far, honey?
I love it. I think I really like this article.
Oh, thank you.
Um, and yeah, all of this sounds really good. I was reminded that of the thriller genre, which
Yeah.
was, you know, one of my favorite genres. Because so much is said in just these quiet, tense moments.
Yeah.
Um, and of course, fairy tales, is always a favorite of mine, like
Yep.
fantasy and um,
That's like my favorite. Yeah.
yeah,
Sci-fi and fantasy and fairy tales, just so that's just the best.
yeah, yeah, really, really cool article here. I like it.
I personally probably wouldn't make the best comedies or horror films or faith-based films. I would make more like sci-fi fantasy or like a western or an action movie, like or a thriller or like that adventure, like the civilization building. Like that's the kind of stuff I think is my kind of thing. Because you have room to be a little bit heady. You know what I mean? You have room to be a little bit brooding and tonal, you know, but you also have like heroic characters. I really
Yeah.
like that stuff. That's just great. And then you're in a world that's like often strange and otherworldly. I like playing with those ideas and creative ideas like that.
Yeah.
So life is like that. You're going through a strange adventure every now and then, and you're like, I don't like, how did I get here? You know what I mean? And it's almost like everything's foreign to you, and those are the moments where you like need some of these stories to kind of like push you through, like it's gonna be okay, you know.
Hmm.
So that's what a lot of reason it speaks to me. These kind of strange moments in life where you need something extra to like push you through. And if you get to see a hero living out difficult things, often that can give you the inspiration, like, you know what, I can do it, you know. That means a lot to me. Let's see. Let's continue on. Number 6 is meaningful tone poems that depict losing and longing for authentic relationship. So that's like a romance in my view. That's like because in my view, I'm a little bit done with the rom-com as a romance. I like just straight up romance. It's more like a
Mhm.
drama, I guess, but I think it's more authentic. And rom-coms to me tend to be a little too formulaic. I
Mhm.
think they're like in a rut right now where they're
Yeah.
just like a little too formulaic. There's always some kind of perfect ending, and there's always like this journey of like, oh, does he like me or not? All of these things are very formulaic and played out. And like I'm just not interested in being wooed by some of today's rom-com. It's just not interesting to me. But like a different one, and the reason before when we were talking about this, I was mentioning that one film. I think it's like 500 Days of Summer or something like that.
Oh
I don't even
yeah.
know if the title is right. I don't even know.
Yeah.
But that one to me stuck out because it was at least not formulaic.
Hmm.
It didn't have that. I mean, yes, there's some of that in there, but for the most part, no. I don't even think he gets the girl in the end. Like, I don't
Hmm.
even think that happened. But like, it was just, it was like a romantic vibe and interesting, relatable characters and more about a theme, a
Yeah.
moral to a story. That's almost more what it was about than the
Yeah.
romance. But yet the romantic vibe kind of comes out of it. So I don't know. It was a different kind of romance to me, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so. My version of today's romance that we need is a meaningful tone poem, right? So a tone poem is like it's almost like a poetic film. It's like what epic poetry is to like the myth, right? It's like it's the myth, but it's like and it's like epic, but it's like also a poem. you know?
Yeah.
So a tone poem is kind of like it's got real, some artistry, some like, there's pacing to the story. It's almost like a song. There's like something to it that's, um, I don't know. It's like it is like you're listening to music, even though the song doesn't necessarily even have to have incidental music in it, or a soundtrack necessarily. It's just kind of how the film is constructed. Um, but I also thought it should depict losing or longing for authentic relationship.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is because it's not the typical rom-com today. The typical rom-com is like, oh, the guy gets the girl in the end, right? This is more about longing, right? It's like the longing for something, whether you get it or not in the end matters. It matters, but it matters less than that feeling of longing. So like there's a real authenticity there where like no matter if it's love and love lost, um the loving part of it is more important than the losing part of it. And so even though and the losing may actually reveals that truth. So that's often why you need every now and then you need to watch a romance where the relationship is lost entirely. Like, you know what I mean? Like, because that's reveals that the loving was more important than the losing.
Hmm.
So, be an authentic person, even if you fail. That's the point of that, you know? So
Yeah.
you don't stop being loving just because the other person maybe wasn't having a good time of it, you know? Uh, so there's wisdom there. But like the loving and the losing of love is, I think, in a way, we need more of that now, because there's a social issue here, which is that how do you get guys into a romance film? Like, I think the way you get guys is to make it about what guys are dealing with now, which is often failing relationships, often being left alone and solitary, often a society that doesn't understand men and doesn't care about men. So we need to like inject a little bit of understanding and empathy. How can you have love without empathy? You know? So if you're making a story about love and romance, how can you never show the man's perspective? That's just silly.
Hmm.
So obviously you want the woman's perspective, but you also want the men, an understanding for where men are today in relationships. So, it doesn't have to be like necessarily a masculinized version of whatever people believe today. I don't know, but like, it doesn't have to be like a red pill film, right? You know what I'm saying? But it can be like at least recognizing what men tend to go through right now, or what men are tending to go through in the dating scene. And we're just not seeing a lot of that. So I would like to see some of that. Um, Actually, do you remember how I was working on that story called Iggy and Alma?
Yeah.
That kind of like was working on that subject a little bit. There was
Yeah.
something there that was like meant to be empathetic to what men are going through right now in relationships, which is a situation where it's all stacked in favor of women right now. So you've got basically I don't want to reveal too much about the film, but it's like it kind of takes all those things into consideration, or at least it tries to, you know. Um, but I thought that'd be interesting, to
Yeah.
mention that. Number 7 is revealing of God's scientific and natural truths. And that's a documentary. Like, I think the kind of there's so many like political documentaries today, which I can understand why that's the case. But the kind of documentaries I'd actually like to see are the ones that tackle scientific issues and natural science stuff, like nature docs, but from like a God's eye perspective. Like, how
Yeah.
did Christ create nature the way he did it? to where it fits perfectly together. Almost like a little bit of creation science in there, but like it's more about like thinking about nature from the perspective of the kingdom of God. Like how do we shepherd nature? How do we, like when God set man in the garden of Eden and he said, you know, basically you get to manage the earth and create the earth into a garden, but also, multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, right? So that means we have kind of a caretaker role in relation to nature. So that means, and also Adam is like naming all these animals. That means we have to understand nature. How are you going to care for nature if you don't understand it? So there's something beautiful from the Christian mind when you look at nature through a lens and you observe how it behaves. There's just
Yeah,
something beautiful about that. And I think that's because of how God set us off into the world from the Garden of Eden.
yeah,
There's something about that that's like, and I don't think it's any coincidence that like every nature documentary is completely the opposite of this. There's like no nature documentary that's talking about things from the perspective of like Adam in the garden and being a caretaker of nature and understanding nature to care for it. Right? Like, do you see that? I don't see it anywhere.
no, not at all.
I mean, wow. And just the understanding of the earth scientifically as a creative mechanism that Christ, you know, created and set in the heavens to like operate like almost self-sufficiently, right? Or at least it appears to run almost self-sufficiently to where there's this ecosystem that's like interdependent, right? And so it's like this machine, all the cogs in the wheel are like running perfectly. And the perfection of that is quite shocking when you look into it. So like I think we need Christian scientists, Christian science. I don't mean Christian science, but
Mhm, mhm,
scientists who are Christians. We need
mhm.
scientists who are Christians who are looking at who are making like a documentary and looking at nature from that perspective.
Yeah.
They're not Christian scientists. They're sorry, I'm cracking myself up here. Um, but I mean, do you see that? I really don't.
No, not at all.
Isn't that
And two,
fascinating?
this idea as well that like all creation is rejoicing. The main message that I get from documentaries is that nature is just trying to survive
Mm-hmm.
by stepping on every other creature
Stepping
around
on
it.
everything else.
And anything beautiful that a creature does is just because they're trying to mate.
Right. Just
And
mating.
and and why are they mating? Because they're intentionally trying to um carry on
Their own genetic code
their
and
genetic, yeah.
yeah, it's all
They
about me.
it's so weird. I can't imagine, a robin thinking, I've got to continue my genetic code, so
No,
I'm gonna work really hard to find a mate. I, I, I don't know. That doesn't make sense to
it
me.
doesn't make any sense. Not at all. I mean, and also you don't see highlighted in these nature documentaries, the interdependence of nature. So you don't see like you're saying, oh, the robin's thinking of himself. Well, what about the honeybee hive, where everybody's thinking about everybody else? Everybody's thinking about the
Yeah,
queen, and the queen is thinking about them, and they're thinking about them,
yeah,
and they're all just like working together, like this machine, you know?
yeah.
Where'd that come from? Why are they? how come they're not like, well, our genetic code? I'm just thinking about me. I just want to mate. Like, no, there's a little more to it than that. Don't you think? A little like they're working together. And do they really have the brain power to figure out, well, if I do this for them and they do that for them and they do that for me, well, do you think they're really thinking about that? No, I don't think so. They're doing what comes naturally to them, right?
Yeah.
And why does that come naturally? Like, why is that order, that structure of, oh, did you get the memo? Remember you're supposed to fill up the honeybee thing today? Like this kind of like orderly structure, where did that come from? Like, you know, I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's not just the honeybee. I mean, there's so many other animals that have a similar codependent relationship with some other animal. You know, like the flowers that only this one bird can pollinate. I mean, it's just like, what? That's pretty cool.
Absolutely.
You know, why doesn't the flower just open up a little bit? Like, come on. You would get so many more flowers if they were thinking of I want to replicate my genetic code. Just change your flower a little bit. Sheesh. Just a
Right.
little bit. That's
Yeah.
all you need to do. But no, I'm not going to do it. No, I just find that just amazing. Like, why don't we get more of those? That'd be so
Yeah.
cool. And the things that it could teach about God's
Yeah.
creation are just, oh my goodness, immense. How inspiring.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so the last two I've got is dramas, relational dramas that respect every side of a social issue, revealing truth. Um, I thought this was important to mention, even though it's kind of like, okay, a relational drama, whatever, we see those a lot. It's important, yes, relational, because they teach you how to talk to people in relationships. I don't know if you've noticed, honey, but sometimes when you read a story or you watch something, it's almost like they're trying to teach you the very way you're not supposed to be. It's like they're trying to teach you by example to be terrible and backbiting and spiteful and be rude and like, where's the good example? You know?
Yeah.
So relational dramas are supposed to teach proper relationships, you know,
Yeah.
and but also this other aspect of it is really important because we don't tend to see this, um, but it's respect of every side of a social issue. So you know, before how I was talking about social issues and stuff like this, like Sound of Freedom. Well, in a relational drama, you can sit with a subject and discuss both sides of an issue, right? Like you've got enough room to breathe where you can do that. And so complicated issues, you could kind of like air out some people with complicated thoughts. And these kinds of relational dramas can really be enlightening for people because what you
Yeah.
get to do is see complicated issues from different perspectives and
Right.
then exhibit empathy for those people that you think are evil and bad, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of like what you'll see today is so many films that the reason they don't make these films anymore as much is because of the politicized nature now of all of our media. So much of it's political. And because it's political, it's about hating the other side. It's not
Yeah.
about understanding and empathy and, you know, trying to understand the other side of a
Right.
debate where you get to like, um, you know, display how to talk to someone in a rational way that's respectful, even though their opinion is terrible, maybe
Mhm.
not very well informed. Maybe they're being too passionate and they're not being very thoughtful. And so what do you get? You get people who are responding with passion and in response. You get all this like tribal warfare, but you don't get a lot of like listening and kind of modeling rational, civilized behavior in which kind of love to your neighbor can be shown,
Yeah.
right? So people that could have terrible beliefs, but then, that and maybe you could even show, okay, this is how not to behave. And then, okay, here's how we get to the good character and we get how to behave, right?
Yeah.
Like one of these examples I really like is the movie Home Alone, where
Yeah.
McAllister is like, he's been left behind. But in the beginning of the story, what did we see? We saw, oh, it's old man, what's his name, across the street, and he's got this big shovel and he's scared. We scared. There's a story about him and he killed people and all this stuff. A bunch of nonsense told, like talking behind someone's back, right? Well,
Yeah.
what do you find by the end of the movie? He's actually a great, kind-hearted dude who saves the little kid in the end.
Yeah.
And why did that happen? Because they went into a church and had the church scene
Hmm.
where they get to talk like rational, civilized human beings and go, oh, I guess you're not all that scary, actually. Not a big deal. Actually, you seem like a kind person, you know? And you think they're going to agree on everything in their politics? Of course not. That's nonsense. But people have to live in a community, right? And so when you have movies like this and stories like this, where you get to model civilized behavior, you're going to get some civilized people coming out of that movie going, that was really heartwarming. And
Yeah.
it was a great movie. I still watch it. We still watch it like I think almost every year.
Yeah.
Just a
Hmm.
lot of fun and it's heartwarming. So, those kinds of relational dramas are important, you know?
Yeah.
And of course, last of all, we have the Mythopoeia, fairy tales and otherworldly journeys that reveal deep inner truths of God. So, those are my favorite, but some of these other ones are really important too. You know, I think I was just mentioning the doing justice, Dirty Harry and stuff like this. And these are important films now that are also not that complicated to make as it comes to like storytelling or script writing. It's a lot of action sequences and things like this where the good guy is like he has a strong sense of justice and duty. Like you could make a Western movie that way, or you could make a crime thriller that way, or you could make, a revenge movie that way. But like those are the kind of those are films obviously we need today. And many of these other nine types of films, my belief is that if we start making these kinds of films instead of what you're getting out of faith-based genre, we'll be doing a lot better, let me tell you. So my hope is to continue this conversation over with some other filmmakers and talk about the kind of films we want to make. And hopefully we can make a difference as we work together and form our teams. And, what do you think, Rebecca? Don't you like my vague questions?
I think this is a very nice article, and you
Oh,
should
thanks.
go ahead
I need to
and do
finish
that.
it.
Yeah.
Send it out there. It's like I need to finish my Meeting Moses Weekly article too. Been so busy. All right, guys, we love you and stand up for the culture, make a difference, make some of these films. Goodness gracious. Stop sitting around.
They're all right here.
That's right. They're all right here. Just look at my videos. Look right here. And there they are. No, I hope to publish the article soon. And so well, that's it. That's our thing. Do you want to say anything else, Rebecca? Or tell us where to find you.
You can find me on Facebook where I post things about Jesus.
You're back on there?
Sort of, yeah.
Sort of. Yeah. Well, I know you're on Instagram and you're
Yeah.
on Locals, right? Or no, you're on Substack.
Yeah.
Yes.
Where can people find you?
I'm on X as Jon Croft. I'm on X as the Media Moses. I'm on MediaMoses.com, and I'm here on YouTube at Culture Warfare with Jon Croft. Enjoy it. All right, guys. Love you guys, and we'll talk to you next week.